Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast NFL Division Preview Series. Two divisions already down. We move from East to North, and the AFC right in our crosshairs this fine morning. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined, as always, by a man that needs no introduction. We give him one anyways. The one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, two divisions down, 6 to go, my friend. We're moseying right along to the start of football season.
And I think we have the best division in football right now.
Look at that. Right off the top ropes, calling it the best division in football. And the betting market agrees when you look at how tightly bunched up these teams are. Had a lot of fun diving into the Ravens, the Bengals, the Browns, and the Steelers, trying to figure out exactly where some of that value might lie. We also do have the first full slate of preseason football getting underway this weekend. Those markets continue to go haywire. But we have a lot of ground to cover, my friend, so we may as well get right into it. Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, let's go for it.
When we look at the Ravens' numbers as far as some of the top-line prices, this is a team who sees their win total at 10, shaded to the over. They're 2-1 to win the division, second favorites behind the Cincinnati Bengals. And when you look at Baltimore's odds to win the AFC and NFC, right around 10-1, we'll call it for the AFC, 20-1 to win the whole kit and caboodle. And Payne, it finally took a lot of prisoner's dilemma, back and forth negotiations, but Baltimore has the franchise quarterback, and they've committed to Lamar Jackson long-term.
Good move. I mean, what else were you going to do?
I'm not sure. I saw enough of the Tyler Huntley experiment that I don't think that was going to be a successful endeavor should they continue down that path, but what took them so long to try and get this deal done? Was it Lamar's camp? Was it the Ravens trying to figure out if they had other options? Or was it just, hey, this is where we want to be, and we don't want to move a lot faster if we don't have to?
I think we joked about it back in May. Neither of them got the deal done. Jalen Hurts and his agent got this deal done, right? I mean, once there was that data point out there that, Deshaun Watson's deal was an anomaly and not the market standard, suddenly this deal quickly fell in line with Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. So ultimately, I think that's what pushed this over.
It reminds me a lot of the running joke back in the day when I was behind the counter at Caesars, is that we could take a 6-figure bet, but we weren't going to move based on action because my boss had absolutely no clue. But if Mirage took a 4-figure bet, there was a better chance you could move the number at Caesars, despite not taking action there. So let the market context dictate some of the terms there. And when you look at Lamar Jackson, he's gone 45-15 in the games that he started and finished. 11 of those 15 losses with him at the helm were by one score or less. So obviously when Lamar is out there, he gives Baltimore more than a puncher's chance. Of course, some of the legacy that he has already carried forth to this point in his career, tarnished a bit by the postseason record and Baltimore never having the ability to get over the hump. But as a result, we see the Ravens make a drastic change offensively. Gone is Greg Roman as offensive coordinator. In comes Todd Monken from Georgia. And this was a Ravens team that was amongst the worst teams in the league as far as their red zone touchdown rate, and a massive drop-off year over year. We can talk a little bit about Lamar. It's obviously a running back room by committee, and plenty of information there about which will be the lead back, who's healthy enough to be out there, and what the hell is going on with J.K. Dobbins. But they also made a concerted effort to give Lamar the weapons in the receiving room that a lot of people questioned him having over the last couple of years. And when you look at over the last few seasons, this was a Ravens team who added guys like Chris Moore, Sammy Watkins, and Demarcus Robinson. A little bit different. When you bring in Odell Beckham Jr., still not in the peak of his career, obviously. You draft Zay Flowers, and Rashad Bateman came off the PUP list earlier this week. When you look at the Ravens offense, I know you're a big Todd Monken fan and what he meant to Stetson Bennett's career while the mayor was in charge of things in Athens. But what are some realistic expectations for how this Ravens offense is going to look in 2023?
So right at the top, you mentioned the guy who didn't return. Lamar's back. Greg Roman's not. I know Ravens fans are happy. And listen, I mean, Baltimore ran this unique offense that was tough to stop initially, but after you do the same thing for for 4 to 5 seasons without major adjustments, defenses can catch on, and it's not really unique anymore. Todd Monken, obviously, people know my thoughts there. He just shows an ability to cater game plans to opponents week to week. Jameis Winston was certainly turnover prone, but the Buccaneers offense has hovered outside the top 10 in schedule adjusted efficiency for multiple years. And then after Monken left in 2019, it kind of just fell off a cliff until Brady came to town. The talent at Georgia was obviously overwhelming, but you could at least see one week it's a power run game. The next week, Monken's letting Stetson Bennett throw it all over the park. My understanding here is, and I'm going to be nice and tip this off, Monken wants to open this thing up, right? Think Louisville, Lamar Jackson 2.0.
Well, there goes my fantasy value in Lamar, so thanks for ruining the surprise.
Things are kind of spread, and when Lamar does take off and run, it's against lighter boxes. If you look last year on first down, the Ravens saw loaded boxes on 70% of snaps. It was 9% higher than league average. I would fully expect the Ravens to throw a little bit more. Last year, Baltimore was 23rd in pass rate over expectation. That's not going to be the case this year. And I would envision, an uptick in pace under Todd Monken as well. You mentioned the weapons. Best of Lamar's career by far, right? I'm a Zay Flowers guy. I know that situation well. He's a Fort Lauderdale kid. Elite feet, right? Super quick. Has 4.4 long speed as well. Got docked for his size a little bit, but showed he could put on weight. Came to the combine 10 pounds heavier than he left last season. If you put on the film, he ran open all day, every day the last 2 seasons at Boston College. Their O-line was just so bad, quarterbacks couldn't get Zay the ball downfield.
Well, and the other thing about that, too, not to cut you off, is that Boston College had no other weapons. When you went in preparing for Boston College to throw the football, teams still couldn't cover Zay Flowers on a week-in, week-out situation.
No, they couldn't, but they'd have to get him the ball on those short intermediate routes, right? Wide receiver screens, things of that nature, and you just kind of see him streaking wide open down the field, and you look back and the quarterback was on the ground within 2.5 seconds. So you couldn't really do anything there. Yeah. So, what I'm hearing is they're moving Zay Flowers around. Basically stacking him up outside in the slot, in motion. He's been the best pass catcher in camp so far. You referenced OBJ, 100% healthy. Harbaugh is smartly limiting Beckham's camp reps. Now, they obviously paid too much for OBJ, but it's a 1-year deal, so it's not going to have impact down the line, and it certainly helped smooth things over with Lamar. And I agree. I don't think he's in his prime. But you go back to OBJ's final 4 games with the Rams in 2021.
True. Very good point.
They were prime level OBJ. LA does not win a Super Bowl without him. Those 4 playoff games, OBJ averaged 2.6 yards per route run. It was pretty wild. Mark Andrews, obviously still around, one of the league's premier pass catching tight ends. His hands actually get better. I think there's going to be less focus paid to him. Isaiah Likely is all the Raven camp. We know Todd Monken loved running those 2 tight end sets at Georgia. Rashad Bateman flashed early on in year 2 before the injury, still working his way back. You mentioned he got removed from the PUP list yesterday, actually. There's a slew of depth guys as well. Tylan Wallace has been wide receiver 3 in camp so far, kind of thriving in that role. Then you bring in Nelson Aguilar. He's apparently shown good chemistry with Lamar. Still have Devin Duvernay, who was above a replacement level receiver last year in what was his most expansive role as a pro. The O-line on paper is damn good. Word is they've struggled in camp so far, so they kind of need to trend better as season approaches. But we saw Ronnie Stanley return to his great pass blocking form at left tackle after back-to-back injury-riddled seasons. So you get another year removed from that big injury. That should help. Ben Cleveland still lacks the athleticism and feet, so I know everyone has him penciled in as a starter in their previews. Word is it's actually rookie 6th-rounder Laulu. Has the inside track at left guard. Tyler Linderbaum was an elite run blocker as a rookie, struggled in pass pro. I think that part of his game improves in year 2. Kevin Zeitler at right guard, just kind of steady Eddie plus pass blocker and run blocker. Is approaching age 34, though, so let's see what that looks like. Morgan Moses was the most well-rounded blocker the Ravens had last season, nearly 1,100 snaps of being a plus pass protector and run blocker. has struggled a little bit in camp with some speed rush guys. Patrick McCarry is a real nice luxury to have as a swing tackle, and Patrick Ricard is now getting reps at offensive line because I think some of those fullback sets probably non-existent in Todd Monken's offense. Running back room, you hit it perfectly. Like it's interesting, right? It's can Dobbins and Gus Bus stay healthy? Wildly efficient when they're on the field. If you look among running backs with at least 100 rush attempts last season, Dobbins was number 1 in defensive adjusted value over average, even though it looked like he was running with a 20-pound weight attached to his surgically repaired leg. Gus Edwards was 13% better in value over an average running back, and it just sounds like Todd Monken's trying to unlock Justice Hill as strictly a pass-catching back, which I think we both thought was the case 2-3 years ago, just never came to fruition. They kept trying to make him a runner. The Ravens' offense, I think, is, as we put a bow tie on this, kind of why pro bettors are bullish on Baltimore. And, think about this. It's like Lamar Jackson's happy again, got paid. Now throwing to the best set of weapons he's ever had. Clear upgrade with Todd Monken. On paper, top 7 offensive line, efficient running backs. And the real positive here is the schedule of defenses Baltimore faces this season. Goes from top 5 to below average. Explosive play defense is projected to be bottom 10, so I would expect bigger plays. Baltimore, you hit it perfectly, also struggled situationally last season. Green zone offense was bottom 10 in the league. Red zone offense ran at a 46% efficiency rate, which ranked 30th. So on top of getting Lamar back healthy, which immediately helps those situations, the schedule of red zone defenses projects to be bottom 10 as well. So big stock arrow up for the Ravens offense.
The J.K. Dobbins situation, for those folks who have done some reading, obviously Ravens fans paying closer attention, is fascinating to me. Look, all these guys should push to try and get paid, but when you're a second-round draft pick, you're due $1.4 million, and it's been shown that your value to this offense, you don't really have a whole heck of a lot of leverage. And John Harbaugh's comments, by the day appear to be growing in terms of, hey, J.K. knows what's best, but he probably be a good idea for him to get some of those reps. Wonder if this thing gets resolved sooner rather than later. Melvin Gordon, also another familiar name that was introduced to the mix. We'll see if Gordon actually makes the team. Keaton Mitchell drawing some rave reviews too, but a little bit undersized, a player that I know you and I both like when we watched ECU last year.
Should have a role in special teams, I'm told.
Defensively for this Ravens team, they overall efficiency-wise improved year over year, but they have to find more pressure. I mean, this was a group that we saw blow way, way, way too many leads when they were playing with double-digit margins late in the contest. David Ojabo, a guy, coming out of Michigan that people were extremely high on, tore his Achilles in the build-up, should be healthier after being limited in his rookie year. When you look at this team on the defensive line, they made a commitment to Broderick Washington recently, a 3-year deal. Very favorable for the player to get that job security, but also, in my opinion, over the next couple of years, one that can pay dividends for the franchise. The big move the Ravens made in the middle of last year was bringing over Roquan Smith, and while it's an undervalued position that you've taught me and the listeners all too well, what it allowed was the Ravens to slot some of their other linebacking talent in a position where they could get the best of them, most notably Patrick Queen, who could play downhill. Reminds me an awful lot of the situation that unfolded in Tampa, where once they allowed Devin White to have fewer responsibilities, they were able to reap some benefits, and this is a secondary that'll need a little bit of a resurgence. Payne, I was blown away by one thing there, and I'll let you take the defense where you feel is most apropos, that some of the grades that Marlon Humphrey received in coverage did not pass the eye test when we watched Ravens games for maybe weeks 11 to 17 when he was dealing with a myriad of injuries. As you begin to assess the Ravens defensively, where do you see some of the strengths from this group, and where do you have some concerns if they're going to be the team to beat in the division?
I thought Baltimore's defense, when I looked at it earlier this offseason, you start to see how the pieces are forming together, and then you do deep dives, and then you do another round of deep dives for a preview like this, and I just come away with saying this is one of the tougher units in the league to project. There was just so much variance last season, to your point, with those fourth quarter blown leads. If you looked at the first 3 quarters, the Ravens defense was second in EPA per play and had the 5th best success rate allowed. Fourth quarter and overtime, the Ravens defense folded like a cheap tent, dead last in EPA per play and success rate allowed, and both were dead last by a country mile. So, it makes it a little bit more difficult. You mentioned some of the guys up front. I think there's seemingly some reliance here this year on the young guys finally turning the corner with veterans like Calais Campbell and Justin Houston moving on. I thought Justin Houston was a great situational edge rusher, more than a 14% pressure rate on over 300 pass rush snaps, and as a whole, Baltimore had the 5th lowest pressure rate in the league last season, and now you lose your best pressure guy. You referenced David Ajabo, only played 23 snaps as a rookie after tearing his Achilles at the Combine. Prior to that injury, he was an athletic freak, 6'4", 250, who could run 4.5, had a 19% pass rush win rate his final season at Michigan. I'm hearing good things. Apparently, he added 10 pounds of muscle this offseason, looks explosive. He needs to be elite, though, right? I mean, that's kind of the baseline for performance for him, for this defense not to tail off. Owe at the other end position seems to be a one-trick pony through 2 seasons, and that trick is just solid, right? He's been average against the run. Owe, is just 10% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. Needs a big year 3. Michael Pierce is the veteran of the group. Love him. Does a great job taking on multiple blockers. Elite nose tackle. Just hasn't been able to stay healthy recently. Yep. That's kind of his downside. But boy, he's fantastic. Only but 300 snaps the last 2 seasons. Justin Matabuke, fringe 5-star guy that went to A&M 3 straight seasons in the NFL as a replacement level player. Word is he's having a monster camp. It's a contract year. Let's see if that improves his play. You mentioned Broderick Washington. He's improved each of his first 3 seasons in Baltimore. He was someone the analytics guys loved coming out of college. Need him to take another leap. I felt like Tyus Bowser was about to turn the corner and be this elite presence. Suffered an Achilles injury. He's been nursing a knee injury in camp. But past those 6 guys, just not a lot of depth. Linebacker group looks solid. Now, most know my opinion. I wouldn't have given up a 2nd and a 5th round pick in addition to $100 million for a middle linebacker. But Roquan Smith played at an elite level for Baltimore last season. You look from week 13 onward, it was easily Roquan's best 7-game stretch of his career. He fits the Ravens system well. Patrick Queen. His play is really uneven, but the light came on in year 3, and if you just look at the game-by-game data, it kind of started in week 5 against Cincinnati. From that point forward, Queen only had 3 games below replacement level the rest of the season, and that's saying something because, Queen was virtually unplayable his first 2 seasons. You have rookie Trenton Simpson. He's flashed in camp, dealing with a little bit of a soft tissue issue, but, 4'4" guy at 245 pounds. Secondary looks thin to me. That's kind of was my big takeaway here. But, Kyle Hamilton, probably the Ravens' best defender, graded out top 7 among 93 qualifying safeties in run defense, pass rush, and coverage. Marcus Williams is an elite deep safety, has been for the last 6 seasons. The Ravens desperately need Marlon Humphrey to be elite. Allowed 68% of targets to be caught most of his career, finished corner 32 among qualifying outside corners and yards allowed per coverage snap. You referenced some of the nagging injuries that he played through last season. To me, it just kind of seems like Humphrey hasn't regained his confidence and become that, elite corner again after the Bengals wore him out in that Week 7 game of the 2021 season. But you look like past Hamilton, Humphrey, and Williams, there's questions. Rock Ya-Sin is now on his 3rd team since 2019, hasn't lived up to the 34th overall pick, replacement level player. And, at the start of camp, apparently suffered a knee injury last week. MRI came back with no structural damage, but we have to keep our eyes on that. And, with that injury, it sounds like Jalen Armour Davis has run his cornerback too the last week. He's flourished. Was a 4th round pick out of Alabama last year. Good footwork, long speed, ran 4.39. Brandon Stevens sounds like he's going to be the Swiss Army guy in this secondary. He's been used at safety and outside and slot, has played nearly 1,200 snaps the past 2 seasons, below replacement level player. Geno Stone in the mix for snaps this season. Again, I'm not really fully comfortable with anyone past, Hamilton, Humphrey, and Williams. So the depth is a little shaky to me. I think what makes the Ravens defense so tough to project, right? It's just like young guys need to step up simultaneously in the front 7. Multiple guys along that D-line are returning from pretty significant injuries. The secondary is thin. You look at the schedule of opposing offenses Baltimore projects to face, top 3 in the league. And at the same time, injury luck should improve. So that's the positive. Baltimore is the 4th most injured defense last season. And it's impossible right, to be elite for 3 quarters, and then the worst defense of the last decade in the fourth quarter. So you have to project some positive fourth quarter variance into your numbers this season. But I would still bet against this defense being, one of the top 7 in the league again.
What's so interesting, you mentioned the schedule for the Ravens, and obviously they have a very late bye, all things being equal there, not till week 13. But as far as their divisional games are concerned, they'll play every divisional opponent on the road the first time through, and they'll play 3 of them in that 4-week span that starts week 2, and they go to the Bengals. They'll have a home game against the Colts. They'll go to the Browns, to the Steelers. And when you talk about the final finishing kick of the season, going to be a little bit difficult to make up ground because they won't play a divisional opponent from week 12 to week 17. They'll close things out with the Steelers. So if the Ravens are going to make noise, they can't get swept on those 3 road games to kick things off. Need to steal at least one of them against a trio of AFC North rivals. But no doubt an interesting team because we'll see if the offense can mask some of those defensive deficiencies that could be on full display. But to your point, can't be as historically bad as they were in the final stanza.
No, and maybe they get a touch lucky, right? You face the Bengals week 2 of the season. Maybe, Burrow's probably back, but is he a pocket statue at that point? Is his mobility still a little bit limited with the calf? So maybe you do catch Cincinnati at the right time early in the season.
Well, you mentioned the Bengals because you are the consummate analyst around these fine parts. You provide a logical segue for us right into the Cincinnati Bengals breakdown. And when we talk all things Cincinnati, we can start with some of their top-line markets. Their win total sits at 10.5, shaded to the over, in that $1.30 to $1.40 range. They are the favorites in the AFC North. Shop around as always. Some prices upwards of plus 160 or so. And when you look at the top-line markets, right around 5 to 1 to win the AFC. And if you shop, you can find a 10 on them to finally break through and win the Lombardi Trophy. Last year was the first time that the Bengals were back-to-back division champs since the early 80s. Payne, does that mean we have to finally say nice things about Zach Taylor, or does Joe Burrow get all the credit for this?
No, I mean, you just got to start giving Zach Taylor and Lou Anarumo their just due. Obviously loaded with talent, but yeah, I mean, this was a coaching staff that I think we were dead wrong about.
And clearly it's a franchise that's in win-now mode. When you look at Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins accounting for less than $25 million of the team's salary cap, there will come a time where they have to pay the piper, and I thought it was interesting when you see the team make a commitment on the defensive side to Logan Wilson. T. Higgins, at least publicly, says all of the right things, knowing that he'll have a payday either here or somewhere else. And as far as Joe Burrow's injury concern, you mentioned it, something to monitor for week 1. The Bengals say it's a non-issue with the calf strain. Jamar Chase says he doesn't want to see a starting quarterback until week 5, and you can understand why, because this team goes as Joe Burrow goes, and some of the underlying metrics, Payne, were absolutely phenomenal for what this quarterback has meant to resurrect a relatively dormant franchise and give them reason to believe that they can finally break through and potentially win a Super Bowl.
I mean, it is championship or bust. That is what this is in Cincinnati. And when you Burrow, Chase, and Higgins are hitting the cap for a combined $23.8 million this season, it's the best big 3 cap allocation of any team in the NFL for now. Burrow obviously gave us a scare 2 weeks ago. Non-contact injury. I think it's the best you could have possibly hoped for. And then Zach Taylor was asked about it yesterday. And, Wednesday the 9th, depending on when you're listening to this, and basically said it will be several weeks from when I said it will be several weeks. So it sounds like this is kind of lingering a little bit more than initially expected.
Very Yogi Berra-esque, by the way, with that particular comment to the media.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think he understood that he was asked 2 weeks ago. The injury happened exactly 2 weeks ago. So I liked it. I thought it was a smooth move there. We also know the Bengals took a very cautious approach with Jamar Chase's injury last year, allowed him to sit an extra week after he said he was already 100%. Obviously, the good doc Deepak gives the most updated timeline for Joe Burrow later in this show. It's timestamped. Give it a listen. But the positive is Burrow's missed offseason work every year of his career, and it hasn't really skipped a beat in season. It's just unfortunate to what we were talking about a few moments ago, is the first 2 games this year are both against division rivals. But, past the calf injury for Burrow, and you kind of get back to brass tacks here, I think the biggest change for the Bengals offense is something we uncovered and talked about publicly before anyone last season, and that was the way defenses were given Cincinnati's offense, the Mahomes treatment, 2 high shell looks, limit the explosive plays, make Burrow and that offense drive it methodically, and you could see it right away in the numbers. Burrow's ADOT was the lowest of his career. Higgins and Chase had the lowest yards per route run of their careers, both shrunk by more than half a yard year over year. Kind of took the Bengals about 4 or 5 weeks to finally adjust and figure out what they were seeing. And from that point on, give Zach Taylor some credit and just completely changed things up. Cincinnati went with this far more quick, short pass attack. Shotgun usage week 6 and 7 was up 18% over the first 5 weeks in total. Burrow's shotgun usage soared 22% from week 6 onward. Play action rate dipped 19%. The Bengals basically let Burrow get more comfortable, see the entire field, be a distributor, right? Kind of this point and click quarterback. And he had the second quickest time to throw. There was also a shift in play calling, something we really pounded the table for the last 2 seasons prior, right? Stop running so much on first down. Stop running so much on second and long. Finally, run rates on those 2 downs dipped dramatically, and the Bengals as a whole ended up kind of mirroring the Chiefs, right? Second highest pass rate over expectation in 2022, only trailed Kansas City. The Bengals, for the most part, proved, they could beat 2 high shell after, the first 5 weeks. It'll be interesting to see, how defenses choose to defend them this season. The positive, though, Cincinnati faced the 3rd toughest schedule of defenses last season, now projected to face an average schedule of defenses and a below average schedule of pass defenses. So could be interesting there. You mentioned the spending spree. Most of that came along the O-line again. They're all in, right? I mean, the front office in Cincinnati, give them credit. They've been docked for decades for being cheap. They see the 3 kids on rookie deals. They spent last year on the O-line, didn't really pay off. It was a really healthy unit in totality last year, but the Bengals were 30th in pass block win rate, 16th in adjusted line yards created. So those are real O-line metrics. If not for Burrow releasing the ball at the second quickest rate among quarterbacks, there wouldn't have been a decrease in pressure and sack rates. So this O-line, just needs to step up here. Obviously, Orlando Brown was the splash signing, $31 million signing bonus. This is a front-loaded deal. It's really just a 2-year deal. Brown was tackle 19 out of 66 qualifiers last season. Jonah Williams seems much happier since becoming a dad. He's taken the move to right tackle, much better sense. If you remember, late March, early April, Jonah's agents demanding trades. They're being loud in the media. It's a contract year for Williams. The dislocated knee is 100%. Cap and Karras are solid guys on the interior, both above replacement level players. Cordell Volson is the weak link, but should make a year 2 bump. Played over 1,300 snaps as a rookie at a below replacement level. I would fully expect the Bengals O-line to improve year over year, especially when you see a dip in pass rush schedule. Elite pass catcher group, obviously, right? Chase, Higgins, Boyd. I think the hope is Charlie Jones becomes that 4th guy this year and the 3rd guy next when Tyler Boyd becomes a free agent and the Bengals can't afford him. If they're able to keep Higgins, then that maybe changes the dynamic of the Boyd contract. Charlie Jones has missed time in camp with a shoulder injury, so let's see what that looks like the next few weeks now that he's back healthy. There's really no need to elaborate on how good Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are. Running back room, I think, is the most interesting. We saw Mixon, take a pay cut to kind of counter the off-field issues and the declining efficiency when it looked like Cincinnati was about to release him. Mixon's battled some injuries the past few seasons, lost his burst. Maybe we see positive regression here. I mean, Mixon has the most ideal situation of any running back in this league because the pass game is so potent for Cincinnati that Mixon was fortunate enough to have the largest percentage of carries against light boxes last season, but was somehow outside the top 35 in yards after first contact and 10-plus yard runs. You look past Mixon, they went out, drafted Chase Brown in round 5. Word is he started camp a little slow. Travion Williams has looked solid, but dealing with an ankle injury. Chris Evans could be the odd man out. It's just so weird to me. I look at Evans. To me, he should get more burn. His skill set is an obvious one for being a third down back, averaged over 2.1 yards per route run in 2021, 2.7 last year. Those are monster numbers for a running back when you think about where they're typically catching the ball in the field. Beat writers are claiming the staff doesn't trust Evans in pass protection, but the metrics indicate otherwise. This isn't, to me, an overly complex breakdown here, Todd. Like, either Cincinnati trots out a top 5 offense again, or they'll have burnt Burrow's rookie window without a ring, and at that point it gets a little bit tougher.
Yeah, you end up paying a guy knowing that you just can't surround him with the kind of pieces he'll need to make them as competitive year in, year out, and the Bengals have been close. They've been knocking on the door, getting to a conference championship game each of the last 2 years, breaking through against the Rams, but coming up short in the big game, and then last year being unable to knock off Kansas City in that particular spot. But we're selling the Bengals a little bit short of all the focus is just on some of those high-profile offensive weapons and the fantasy impact. Lou Anarumo, a name that you have made as familiar to the NFL fan as just about anybody over the last couple of years, given the adjustments he's made. I mean, this was a group that finished 6th in points allowed last season, have their eyes on being a top 5 defense in 2023 from some of the comments coming out of camp. I mean, this was a group that ranked number 1 in the NFL in opponent passer rating and opponent completion percentage. One of the biggest questions they'll face on this side of the ball is how they're going to replace 2 ball-hawking safeties in the back end in Von Bell and Jesse Bates, who accounted for 8 picks and finished 3 and 4 in tackles. They spent a lot of draft capital to bring in Dax Hill. A lot more will be expected of him. You bring Nick Scott over from the Rams to try and get him integrated into the offense. They, of course, made a commitment along that pass rush to Trey Hendrickson, talked a little bit about Logan Wilson and maybe an underrated linebacking core with some unique pieces for guys that do different things. But when you look at the Bengals defensively, where do some of your strengths and weaknesses lie? And can this group rinse and repeat what we saw for stretches a season ago?
Yeah, I mean, I'll reiterate, we were dead wrong on Lou Anarumo. Every data point that we had prior didn't really indicate this was a guy that was going to be anything more than average, but he just does a great job getting guys to play as one. The players praise Anarumo for listening and being a great communicator. If you've listened to some of those player interviews, the Bengals defense is multiple. It game plans to opponent. In-game adjustments we've talked about for 2 years, they're great. And that really, allows this group to play consistently. Now, in totality, the defensive pieces aren't elite, so we don't typically get top-end performances. And the Bengals offense is so good, it certainly alleviates some of the defensive pressure. As I see it, heading into 2023, I would kind of exclude Trey Hendrickson from this. The Bengals defensive line group has to be better, right? It's the 3rd most expensive D-line in the NFL, but as a group finished 21st in pass rush win rate, 17th in team pressure grade, only registered 30 sacks. You're breaking in a lot of new guys, as you mentioned, in the secondary, and face a below-average schedule of offensive lines this season. So it's time for Cincy's D-line to eat here. Trey Hendrickson, best of the bunch by a mile, more than a 16% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, was top 5 among qualifying edge rushers and pass rush win rate. I like the idea of DJ Reader being healthy and in a contract year, coming off his best pressure season of his career, more than a 10% pressure rate on pass rush snaps from the interior. And you looked at the Bengals' run defense improved from Week 11 onward after Reader returned from his injury. So he's a good dude. I think Sam Hubbard at this point, we know what he is. You know what you're getting. He's graded out between 66 and 69 for 5 straight seasons. 60 is replacement level. Not an elite pressure guy, not a great tackler, but a very good edge setter. Top 5 in run stop win rate. Smart guy, so you see Lou drop him in coverage when he wants to get exotic. BJ Hill is a plus inside player, somewhat of a contract year because Hill hits the book for $10.8 million next season, and it's an easy get out for Cincy. Word is Joseph Asai has taken the next step, and his burst off the edge has been elite in camp. Had an 11% pressure rate on pass rush snaps his first season. Cam Sample improved in year 2 to replacement level. We're only 2 weeks into camp, so I wouldn't panic yet, but Miles Murphy hasn't popped, mostly running with the 3rd-team edge group, so something to monitor there because I know they took him in the first round thinking he could be an immediate contributor. Bengals linebackers had arguably the most positive variance of any group in the league. You mentioned the big signing for Logan Wilson. Talk about massive improvement simultaneously for Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson. Pratt had nearly 2,100 snaps of data his first 3 seasons, was below replacement level for each season. Pratt graded out 11th among 60 linebackers with at least 500 snaps last season. Logan Wilson played over 1,300 snaps his first 2 seasons, well below replacement level. Wilson graded out 17th out of 60 backers last season. So, my mind, if I'm looking at this and, Pratt and Wilson were a company in the S&P 500, you'd short their combination of production repeating itself again this season. I think the secondary is where most of the transition comes. Jesse Bates, Von Bell, Eli Apple are all gone. Chidobe Awuzie tore his ACL 10 months ago. Corner is typically the position that takes the longest to recover from ACL injuries, so I think it's crucial Awuzie gets back to 100% as quick as possible. Graded out the Bengals' best corner in coverage, fringe top 20 in adjusted yards per coverage snap allowed. The Bengals were 4th in drop back success rate allowed the first 8 weeks when Awuzie was in the lineup last season. The rest of the secondary is a combination of young kids and short contract veterans. Cam Taylor-Britt played nearly 800 snaps as a rookie. Elite speed, that's Taylor-Britt's best trait. Undersized, so he struggles against the run. I would expect a year 2 bump. Only allowed 55% of targets to be caught, but finished 80th out of 87 qualifying outside corners in adjusted yards allowed per coverage snap. Dax Hill was the obvious successor to Jesse Bates. Versatile guy, can play both safety spots, can play in the slot. Got his feet wet with 150 snaps as a rookie. Need him to play much better in a heightened role. DJ Turner was Dax Hill's running mate at Michigan. Turner is... he's just like this athletic specimen. Had a 9.6 relative athletic score. They're out of 10. So, and the guy runs 4.26. A little undersized. Jordan Battle, the 3rd rounder out of Alabama, will be a backup safety and a special teamer. And then you have 3 veterans. Mike Hilton, and then since he went and signed Sidney Jones and Nick Scott, who you mentioned, Mike Hilton to me is the unsung hero, honestly. Plays a fantastic slot, top 20 among inside corners in adjusted yards allowed per coverage snap. He was also a plus run defender, and we know Lou loves sending him on those backside blitzes. Sidney Jones, this is his 5th team since 2017. Had good seasons in coverage in 19, 20, and 21. Nick Scott, Super Bowl winning free safety for the Rams. He plays deep, penciled in as a starter. 3 straight seasons of below replacement level play. So you mentioned something about the Bengals talking about being a top 5 defense. I can tell you that's not going to happen. The D-line should improve.
Just be average.
No, I think, you project somewhere between 11 and 14 maybe. The D-line should be better. Linebacker play likely regresses. We'll see if the young guys are ready to step up in the secondary. And the biggest thing for me is, year over year, the idea that Cincinnati's defense faced a top 5 schedule of offenses last season is dead wrong, right? Context matters. And we look at all this data and we parse it out, and all of it's great for the most part. But there is still this human element to it. And when Cincinnati actually played those offenses matters. Trubisky week 1 in a brand new system who was eventually benched. Cooper Rush and not Dak Prescott. Flacco. Bridgewater and not Tua. Mariota, who was later benched. Brissett twice and not the guy, Cleveland paid $230 million to. Mayfield, who was later cut. P.J. Walker. Anthony Brown and not Lamar. Rookie Kenny Pickett. Didn't end up having to play the best offense on the schedule. Debatable, I would say the Chiefs are. But didn't have to play Buffalo effectively, right? Tom Brady and the Buccaneers were already cooked by week 15. And then you had the Saints, Panthers, Titans, and Patriots all ranked outside the top 20 in schedule-adjusted offenses. To me, that is not a top 5 schedule of offenses. And that's one thing with the data, right? When it kind of gives, credit to playing a healthy Miami offense, a healthy Cowboys offense, of which Cincinnati did not play. The quarterbacks project much better than what Cincinnati actually faced last season. And so, I just get the idea of a top 5 defense out of your head.
This is a Bengals team who no doubt has a target on their back. We'll see if they're able to stay atop the heap, but it will be extremely difficult for them to do so. And as always, we're going to want to monitor the status of Joe Burrow. Last year, going into week 1, dealt with an appendectomy, threw 107 interceptions against the Steelers. We'll see if he's a little bit better out of the gates with that lower body injury when they take on the Cleveland Browns. But before we get to the Browns, I want to remind all of you, our loyal Bet the Board listeners, to follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there on social media. And as always, and most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod if you haven't already done so, as we mentioned at the top of the show. Already division previews out for both the AFC and NFC East. All 11 college football conferences have been previewed for you as extensively as we know how. Some best bets on there, and a great way to get you prepared for the college football season that's right around the corner. And if you're looking to get your action fix in the interim, encourage you to check out our NASCAR podcast, Stay Green, as well. And Payne, when you were talking about the Cincinnati Bengals and when they face certain quarterbacks, this team didn't have their franchise quarterback for an extended period of time. And when you look at the Cleveland Browns now, expectations getting ratcheted up as a result. The Browns win total, if you shop around, we'll call it 9, juiced over 9.5 with a little bit of plus $1.10 plus $1.15 out there. As far as their divisional odds, they slot firmly in third behind the Ravens and Bengals at a shade less than 4-1. And if you believe the Browns can finally get through the AFC and get to the Super Bowl, it'll pay you right around 16 or 18-1 for the AFC and right around 40-1 to win the whole damn thing. And this year, obviously, the Browns' higher expectations as last year became a bit of a lost season. Not a knock on Jacoby Brissett, but clearly not the quarterback that Deshaun Watson can be when he's healthy. The passing game, though, was inconsistent before Watson returned, and once he returned, the group actually got worse from a metric standpoint, something that you could have anticipated for a quarterback that had essentially been out of the NFL for 2 years. The lost 10 games last year for the first time since 2019 and failed to make the playoffs for the second straight season. As far as the Cleveland Browns this year, Payne, if Deshaun Watson is going to rebound, he's got to complete more than 58% of his passes. His adjusted yards per pass attempt was an absolute disaster. He ended up ranking 24th in the league in a lot of metrics, or below 20th, I should say. So I guess we'll start with the low-hanging fruit here. Deshaun Watson had a couple of games to get his feet wet leading Kevin Stefanski's offense last year. He's going through camp as the number one starter this year, and there are legitimate expectations given the massive salary cap hit and essentially the salary cap hell the Browns will get themselves into after this season.
So I think the first thing is we discussed Kevin Stefanski because it's crystal clear he knows what he's doing, right? He's a damn good offensive mind, and that's really going to help Deshaun Watson. But just thinking about this from like an overarching viewpoint, right? The Browns from 2008 through 2019 never had an offense above league average in schedule-adjusted efficiency. Now one. Over that 12-season span, the Browns' average offensive efficiency rank was 25th. And you look at what Stefanski's done his first 3 seasons, the Browns have finished 9th, 14th, and 8th. And Stefanski's done that with Baker Mayfield, Case Keenum, Nick Mullins, Jacoby Brissett, and a quarterback that hadn't attempted a meaningful pass in 700 days towards the end of last season. And the crazy part is if you normalize for weather, the Browns' offense has been even better under Stefanski because we know about all those ridiculous weather games they've faced the last 2 seasons. I think, obviously, Deshaun Watson is the most important factor. Can't bury the lead, but I thought it was good to kind of maybe talk about that integration. And I don't know what Deshaun Watson is. What percentage of prior performance returns for Watson? Is it 50%? Is it 80%? Or does Watson find a new ceiling with the best offensive mind he's ever worked with? And I think that's where the variance lies within projections from pro bettors. But what we know is this. Watson has the pedigree, right? He was the second-ranked dual-threat quarterback in the 2014 class. First-round pick, still in his prime at 27. What organizations are looking for from the quarterback position has swung more towards Deshaun Watson's traits in 2023 than when he was actually drafted. And you look at the data that we have from 2017, Deshaun's rookie year, through 2021, Deshaun's final year in Houston, there were 57 quarterbacks that played at least 500 snaps over that stretch. Watson was 4th in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation, 8th in adjusted EPA. So he's got a pretty high ceiling. And what we've heard is Kevin Stefanski is building an offense around Deshaun Watson, suited to his skill set. And Stefanski went to Watson and asked him this offseason, what do you like best? What are your favorite things to do? What plays do you like? And my understanding is that's being implemented, even though it's not specifically Kevin Stefanski's go-to stuff offensively. So we're projecting more shotgun and pistol looks. It is highly unlikely the Browns are going to be 28th in pass rate over expectation this season. They're going to throw more. The talent is allowing for more versatility and movement within Stefanski's formations. What's around Watson is far superior this season compared to last. Offensive line returns, all 5 starters, should be healthier. When you look at Jedrick Willis, Joel Bitonio, Posick, Teller, and Conklin only played 28% of snaps together. The offensive line was changing how it blocked in the middle of last season. I think this is one of the best offensive lines in football. It's tough also for Nick Chubb to be any more efficient, but we're projecting the Browns O-line will finish better than 14th in line yards created. You look at Nick Chubb, 69% of his yards came after contact last season. Metrically, this was maybe the scare for some people, but the move to shotgun and pistol shouldn't have a negative impact on Chubb. He was first in rushing yards over expectation per rush from gun and pistol, third in EPA per rush. Receiver group, I think, has a chance to surprise. Amari Cooper just continues to do his
just
thing.
Racks up stats, and for a guy who doesn't play in cold weather, at least get all your numbers before the calendar hits December.
Well, that's the thing. It's like he's always battling an injury, but he plays through them. He's a tough dude. 2.1 yards per route run with subpar QB play and the horrific weather conditions in multiple games. David Njoku is a matchup nightmare. DPJ had another above replacement level season. Started red hot the first 11 weeks, then trailed off. Didn't quite have the chemistry with Watson right away. I thought one of the best moves by a GM this offseason was going out and getting Elijah Moore for what amounts to a pick swap of second and third round picks.
Our guy.
You go back. Yeah, I mean, you just go back to that 2021 season. Final 6 games averaged 3.9 yards per route run and 5 touchdowns. I think the upside with a competent OC and quarterback not named Zach Wilson, sky's the limit here for Elijah Moore to show out. Then you have some young depth pieces, and if you're a college guy, you know these names. David Bell was a horse for us at Purdue. Cedric Tillman has impressed pretty much through the early part of camp. And then you think about the schedule. Cleveland played far and away the most difficult schedule of defenses in the NFL last season. Played the second most passing defenses that were above league average. Now we're projecting a league average schedule of pass defenses. So, I mean, that's real good news for Stefanski and Watson. The real positive is, we'll get to see what this looks like in preseason because Watson's going to get some reps as well.
We don't always talk about depth at the running back position, and you mentioned Nick Chubb. We know he's a horse. Is there any concern about the potential workload that he could take on? I mean, from a fantasy standpoint, I'm sure owners will love the fact if Nick Chubb isn't coming off the field on third down, ceding some of those reception opportunities to a running back like Kareem Hunt, but there's no reliable depth behind him for this Browns team should they want to give him a breather, every third series, or if he wears down as the season goes on, should he take on the workload that we've seen over the last couple of seasons?
Yeah, it's always funny how we think about that, right? It's like, we've bitched in the past few years that there's too much competition back there, and Chubb ultimately has these massive fantasy seasons. Obviously, Kareem Hunt is gone, and Jerome Ford battling a little bit of an injury issue. Demetric Felton is getting some run. Let's see what that turns into. But yeah, I mean, clearly if Nick Chubb goes down, there's some concern in the running back room, but he had the little injury scare there in college, but he has been a workhorse in the NFL and really, neglected being injured any of these years despite piling up a lot of touches.
Yeah, incredible when you look at some of the numbers. Just racks up 1,000-yard season after 1,000-yard season. What I found interesting and entertaining, and Browns fans might not feel the same way, there was a story talking about situational football that the Browns had done. You'll be happy to know that Nick Chubb in the 2-minute drill when they were trying to bleed the clock slid down inside the 5-yard line, didn't dance inside the pylon like he did in a game that cost him early last year against the Jets. When we look at the Cleveland Browns defensively, Payne, the biggest change this group made was at defensive coordinator. Overcomes a familiar name in Jim Schwartz, replacing Joe Woods. And when you look at the Browns, as far as their counting stats last year, they looked fine, but this was a group that was extremely vulnerable to big play and pay dearly for coverage busts with some of the advanced metrics. You bring over Zadarius Smith to help with the pass rush as well. Okoronkwo, another player that can hopefully be disruptive. We know Myles Garrett is an absolute force, and maybe it's addition by subtraction. You take away a player from this defensive unit that you were never sure if he actually wanted to be out there and what his effort level was going to be in Jadeveon Clowney coming off of the edge. As far as Cleveland defensively, if this group can stay healthy, where can they slot amongst the NFL's better defenses?
I think this is one of the more interesting units. I'm intrigued to see what this looks like. Obviously, Joe Woods is gone. We saw the Browns defense make this huge leap from year 1 to year 2 under Woods. Went from 25th to 11th in schedule adjusted efficiency, but then dipped back to a bottom 10 defense last season. Some of that personnel, right? Some of that really poor lapses in coverage. And, when your specialty is a secondary coach, you just can't have game-changing breakdowns in coverage. Jim Schwartz is interesting. Veteran defensive mind, wants guys to attack and play downhill, but do it within the confines of the scheme. So you're going to see twists and stunts and mug fronts, heavy reliance on attacking with 4, very much Jim Johnson-like effectively, right? It's an aggressive defense that plays downhill, but it's not manufactured. If you look at Schwartz, he just wasn't blitz happy when he was a DC in Philadelphia. In fact, you go to that 2018 Eagles defense, Schwartz blitzed the least amount of any defense in the NFL. He's had some good defenses, right? I mean, 2014, Schwartz coordinated a top 3 Bills defense. When Schwartz got to Detroit, he inherited a defense that was 30th. In his final season, the Lions were 12th in schedule adjusted efficiency. Philadelphia was 20th the year before Schwartz arrived, 4th in his first season. So he's been able to have and show some quick improvement with some of those defenses he takes over. The positivity you're hearing from players in the Browns building about Schwartz is telling. You got defenders basically smiling from ear to ear during these pressers when asked about the difference in scheme. I think the Browns defense is going to be vastly improved, right? Upgraded scheme, better buy-in from players. Talent has significantly upgraded. You'll see positive EPA regression on 3rd and long situations. Fumble luck will improve. And the schedule of offenses the Browns defense faced this season, we project to be bottom 7 in the NFL. So that's huge. Part of the, call it talent infusion, is up front for the Browns defense. If you rewind the tape from our preview last season, the entire synopsis was Cleveland had 0 D-line depth, and the interior group was the worst in the NFL. So it's no surprise the Browns finished dead last in EPA per rush allowed. So in comes Delvin Tomlinson. That was the splash free agent signing, 330-pound meatball in the middle, right? Elite run defender his first 3 seasons for the Giants, plus run defender the last 2 in Minnesota. Likely overspent, right, on an interior alignment, but Tomlinson immediately improves the largest hole on the entire roster. 3rd rounder Siaka Ika is actually pretty interesting. I'm chomping at the bit to see how this looks. I mean, at its core, Cleveland's adding, a 360-pound nose tackle to help stop the run. It makes sense. But the reason Ika transferred from LSU to Baylor is because LSU was going to a 4-down front, which is what Jim Schwartz uses. The draft coverage of Siaki is a little bit odd, right? You see Schwartz speaking to him on the phone, and he says, "Not a dump truck anymore. You're a Ferrari now." I mean, Ika had a 2.6 relative athletic score out of a possible 10, right? Since 1987, that puts him in the 26th percentile in athleticism for defensive tackles. I don't know if it's going to work, right? He's running with the 3rd team right now. That's not what you're hoping for in an area of a team that's still pretty weak, even with Delvin Tomlinson. The reason I'm kind of making a big deal of this is if you look right around the room, it's like Jordan Elliott, Tristan Hill, and Tommy Togai have over 2,600 defensive tackle snaps between them. They've earned a collective 45 run grade, 60 as replacement level. Maybe Maurice Hurst, surprises some people this year. Edge group, obviously elite. Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, and Ogbo are a fun trio. Garrett generated 73 pressures, and, you kind of hinted with Clowney not overly focused. All the eyes were on Garrett. 15% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, 26 quarterback hits. Zadarius Smith also had a 15% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, 25 quarterback hits. Hopefully, the knees stay healthy. Ogbo comes over from Houston. Great value signing. Still in his prime, only $12.5 million guaranteed over 3 years. 13% pressure rate on pass rush snaps for Ogbo. Created a ton of havoc. JOK might be my favorite linebacker. Undersized, but just wildly athletic. If the D-line does a better job of keeping guys off him, JOK could have his best season as a pro. Great cover linebacker. Browns still have Anthony Walker and Taki as well. Both are above replacement level linebackers. Jim Schwartz mostly plays nickel defense as his base, so I'm not sure who the odd man out will be, but you have a nice 3-man rotation of reliable guys in the middle there. Coverage is going to change. A lot more man in Schwartz's scheme. All the data suggests Denzel Ward regains his form, was a great cover corner his first 4 seasons, had his worst season last year. Martin Emerson was thrown into the fire as a third-round rookie last season, and you just saw offenses constantly attacked him. But Emerson only allowed 54% of targets to be caught. He flashed. Greg Newsome is a damn good slot corner, 15th in yards allowed per coverage snap, now heading into year 3. Juan Thornhill brings, that championship pedigree with him from Kansas City. Very versatile, athletic safety, better in coverage than as a run defender. But I got to tell you, watching Chiefs games recently, Thornhill was kind of, willing to put his face in the fan the last 2 seasons. Grant Delpit hasn't really lived up to the second-round billing. Finally was healthy last season, played nearly 1,100 snaps, and was 3rd in positive plays created for the Browns defense. Rodney McLeod was a really nice veteran depth piece. I think we see sizable improvement from the Browns defense. I don't think, your joke at the top there, they're not going to be blowing 13-point leads with under 2 minutes to go at home to backup quarterbacks. I'm pretty confident in that. And I think we see a big jump here from 25th to something around league average time.
Well, at least if they were going to blow a double-digit lead to a backup quarterback, it was an elite backup quarterback in Joe Flacco, throwing the ball up.
Does have a ring.
Coming down with the Hail Mary, and the Jets obviously erasing that deficit there, which was a springboard for their season, but a microcosm of everything that went wrong for the Browns last year. One last thing, we talk about Kevin Stefanski and what we think he brings as an adult to the room with an offensive mind. This is an ownership group that hasn't been the most patient. If they don't make the playoffs this year, is Stefanski at risk of losing his job?
I know that's kind of been the hot take, but
I can't see it as a football fan, but it's the Browns, so nothing would ever shock me that this organization does.
Right. And, if he were to be fired, it would be because he isn't able to hire the best staff around him, right? It would be because the defense doesn't improve, that Jim Schwartz was a massive failure. I don't see that happening. Yep. But that would be how, because offensively, we already depicted how good he's been for this organization from that perspective. And I don't know from an offensive standpoint if you can get much better. Now, obviously, he's working with some great talent. The receiver group is better than league average. The O-line's elite. Chubb's elite. Deshaun Watson, you're paying $1 gazillion to. You hope he regains that form, right? So it's a really good offense on paper. Let's see if he can have another monster year. But it would be difficult to see him lose his job unless it's just an epic disaster. And candidly, something we talked about off air is professional bettors are gravitating to the Browns a little bit. And within this market, it's always vital to shop around because prices are different from place to place. And I know, the consensus number on the Browns is over 9.5 plus $1.08. But if you really do some shopping and dig into some of the alt lines, there's 8.5 minus 150 out there. Probably a very good bet.
It is pretty wild, even in this day and age where we talk about sportsbooks copying one another, that there still is that level of efficiency if you want to dig into the numbers and if you have a strong opinion on a team that you can find a good price. So a PSA, like always, shop around, try and get the best number, regardless of what side of the fence you find yourself landing on for a lot of these teams. And when we talk about all the teams in the AFC North, the one team that has been the gold standard for years, obviously the black and gold in Western Pennsylvania, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and their win total 8.5, heavily juiced to the over, right around $1.40 thereabouts. They are the long shots within the division, but still offer a price short of 6-1. If you believe that the Steelers will return to their glory days, this is a team whose odds to win the AFC a shade less than 30-1. and in the mid-50s to win the Lombardi Trophy. And they kept their incredible streak going last year, yet to have a losing season with Mike Tomlin at the helm. They covered the spread at the 4th highest rate in the league over the last decade, which is pretty incredible for a coach that draws a ton of criticism even from his own fan base. But the problem for the Steelers is the last playoff victory for this franchise came way back in 2016. Not good enough for one that prides themselves in winning Super Bowls. The only teams with more wins from the AFC, though, over the last 3 years, and this stat surprised me, were the Bills and the Chiefs. But they had 14 games in 2022, Payne, that were decided by one score in the plus or minus variety. So it tells you you don't have a lot of room for error, and you begin to wonder what this team will look like offensively with Kenny Pickett in his second season. Can he build on the impressive win-loss record we saw down the stretch, even if a lot of the underlying metrics didn't really indicate that he had made massive strides as a quarterback from some of the underlying stats that you typically use to assess elite quarterback play in the National Football League?
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, right? The AFC got much tougher. The North got much tougher. If Mike Tomlin's going to have his, 17th straight winning season and lead Pittsburgh to the playoffs, the most impactful leap has to be at quarterback. And I think Pickett's improvement determines the Steelers' ceiling. And aside from O-line play, it feels like the rest of Pittsburgh's position groups have pretty identifiable baselines without a ton of variance, but Kenny Pickett's play does. And, it's at the most important position. And word out of Pittsburgh after 2 weeks of camp, Kenny Pickett hasn't been terrible, but hasn't been great. Much better the second week than the first. Some of this is by design. Apparently, Mike Tomlin is forcing Kenny Pickett to be uncomfortable. He's putting Pickett in tough situations, hoping that kind of accelerates his improvement. Far more difficult situations than what Pickett will see in a game. Basically, Tomlin in Canada will have Pickett go against the number one defense with 3 backup linemen and his top 2 receivers out. Those kind of tough situations. We did see Pickett improve last season as he got more reps. The first 9 weeks, Kenny Pickett was quarterback 28 in EPA per play, but from week 10 onward, Pickett was QB 9. Most of that improvement was because Pickett stopped turning it over and had really, really great positive variance on third downs. Just 1 of Pickett's 9 interceptions came in his final 8 games, and Pickett's third down EPA among qualifying quarterbacks in the first round was 4th best the last 23 seasons. So, the third down variance probably comes back to life a little bit, so there's got to be some incremental improvement in other areas. Internally, Pittsburgh is trying for more even play from Pickett, but they think he's a gamer, right? That he rises to the occasion, that he's a better game player than practice guy. And, maybe that's the case. From what I have heard, most of Pickett's misses have been short, right? Underthrowing receivers, and we kind of all remember and go back to the combine, right? The small hand measurement drama that became, the leading story for multiple days during a slow time.
Oh, the joys of the draft news cycle, my friend. The joys of the draft news cycle.
and we know coming out, right, the arm strength was just average, and you look at some of the numbers, and Pickett struggled pushing the ball downfield last season, 31st in EPA per pass on throws 10-plus yards. I don't really have a strong opinion on Kenny Pickett one way or another, but, what's around Kenny Pickett should be better. The schedule Pickett faces gets easier this season, right? Faced a top 5 schedule of defenses last year, projecting just an average schedule this season. Pittsburgh's O-line improved in a big way last season. Health played a part in that. Steelers had the healthiest O-line in the NFL. The same 5 linemen started every game. From a pass blocking perspective, Pittsburgh was 7th in efficiency, 7th in pass block win rate. Better running the ball too, right? Pittsburgh saw more loaded boxes than league average. Defenses wanted to make Trubisky and a rookie beat them. And despite those loaded boxes, the Steelers' rushing success rate saw an 8% uptick year over year. And then the largest splash this offseason was at offensive line as well. Signed Isaac Semaleo to start at left guard. 3 straight seasons of great pass blocking for the Eagles. Broderick Jones was brought in to be a day 1 starter at left tackle. My understanding is, at this point, that won't be the case. A quote from a Steelers beat writer earlier this week, Dan Moore Jr. is head and shoulders above Broderick Jones by all accounts through this part of camp. Dan Moore Jr. was also listed as a starter in the depth chart Pittsburgh recently released. Competition's a good thing, though. Mason Cole will start at center again, had his best season as a pro when you factor in snap count and production. If you look at Cole, he decreased his pressure rate allowed from 7.6% to 3.2% year over year. James Daniels has 5 straight seasons of being a plus offensive lineman, had his best pass blocking season ever. Okorafor has proven to be a replacement level player. The Steelers are moving Kendrick Green to fullback. That's going well to this point. Darnell Washington is one of the best blocking tight ends we've seen. I think he helps both tackles. The weapons around Kenny Pickett you referenced are pretty solid. Deontay Johnson will certainly have positive touchdown regression coming his way.
I'm taking him over a half a touchdown reception in 2023. I'm going to go out on a limb there with that prognostication.
Yeah, about minus 40,000 there on that one.
So you're
George
telling
Pickens
me there's a chance.
had a solid rookie season, and word out of camp right now is he looks like a true number one. The Steelers are kind of kicking the tires on Allen Robinson. Feels like a risk-free investment. His best days are probably behind him, but Pittsburgh's actually moving Allen Robinson to the slot. He was never a burner, right? Isn't getting any faster at age 30, but we're going to see Allen Robinson's 28% career slot rate tick up in a major way this season. Internally, they're excited about Robinson's physicality, his size, his leaping ability, matched up on linebackers and safeties over the middle. Calvin Austin is the burner of the group, 4th-round pick out of Memphis last season, never played a snap after injuring his foot, but he brings 4.3 downfield speed. The EPA numbers, as I mentioned, weren't great from Kenny Pickett on throws 10-plus yards. And the guy Pickett has underthrown most in camp so far is Calvin Austin in that burning speed. But Pickett did lead the league with a 76% catchable deep ball rate. So I would expect Calvin Austin to have a few explosives this season. I'm not a huge Matt Canada guy, but I think even, with him calling the shots, Pittsburgh should make a little bit of a leap offensively from, below average to above average this season, especially if Kenny Pickett takes that next step.
Final thing I'll say on this Pittsburgh Steelers offense for anybody that has done their reading, has seen some of the flash highlights, there is no bigger fan of George Pickens than George Pickens himself. So he has all the traits of a true number one receiver. We'll see if he's able to get out there and perform at that high level, given the athleticism and some of the things that we've talked about while he was at Georgia, the dynamic that he gave to that offense when he was actually healthy, able to stay out in the field and keep himself out of some of the garbage along the sidelines and elsewhere. As far as this Steelers team and their outlook defensively,
it was a cooling mechanism. Yeah. He was being nice.
Yeah, very kind to use the Gatorade bottle in such a manner to try and make sure he was taking care of his opposition. As far as this team defensively, projected to have 6 new defensive starters this season. It was a group that allowed the second most touchdown passes in the league last year. When you look at the yards per reception, not exactly numbers to write home about, but it was boom or bust. They forced 20 interceptions. There was a lot of gambling to try and create some of those big plays, maybe because of the offensive limitations that were out there. What do? They go out and they try and bring in some fresh faces in the secondary. An aging Patrick Peterson, who put forth a little bit of a resurgent season for the Minnesota Vikings, and a player in Joey Porter Jr. that's essentially a Steelers legacy that was best defined as uneven during his time in Happy Valley as a member of Penn State, but gone are players like William Jackson, Cam Sutton, Devin Bush, Ahkello Witherspoon, Robert Spillane, and Miles Jack. Payne, we've grown accustomed to the steel curtain defense and what they're capable of doing, but there was a significant difference for what this group could provide as far as a pass rush with TJ Watt out there on the field compared to when TJ wasn't. Hard to project health in this business, but when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers defensively, what's a baseline realistic expectation for how we can expect them to perform?
So we were well ahead of the market on the Steelers defense declining the last 2 seasons. We kind of identified some underlying metrics that were bound to surface. And sure enough, Pittsburgh went from the best schedule-adjusted defense in 2020 to 12th and 14th back-to-back seasons. Most of the decline is because of talent, right? Defensive linemen got old or moved on. Tomlin's inability to fix the linebacker position along with the revolving door of veteran cornerbacks, it's kind of all led to this. Now, there's not a ton of depth on the Steelers defense as I see it, but I think there's a path to getting back in the top 10. As a whole, you kind of referenced the health. Their best is TJ Watt, obviously, played about 400 snaps less than usual due to injury. And even in the 10 games that Watt was available, right, he was playing through a significant injury that wasn't necessarily disclosed. But in the 10 games Watt was on the field, Pittsburgh was second in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency. The 7 games Watt missed spanning 8 weeks, Pittsburgh was dead last in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency. So, I mean, obviously having Watt back healthy is huge. Cameron Hayward continues to defy father time, 34 years old, just keeps playing at an elite level inside. Had a pressure run stop on 13% of snaps. I like the edge group for Pittsburgh past Watt as well, bringing in Marcus Golden for $1.3 million, premium position. What were the other GMs in desperate need of pass rush doing here?
Such an underrated player for everything that Golden has accomplished during his NFL career. I feel like every year his skill set goes underappreciated.
12% pressure rate on pass rush snaps the last 4 seasons, super consistent, 14th most QB hits the last 3 seasons, average edge setter. Golden could be the best value signing this offseason, and there's a couple times over the last few preview seasons I've made that statement, and it's come to fruition about that player. Alex Highsmith had a monster 3rd season. Fully expect the sack numbers and forced fumbles to regress, but a damn good edge. Word out of camp is Nick Herbig is kicking every single tackle's ass. Internally, the Steelers think they've hit on Herbig. Interior of the defensive line past Cam Hayward, a little bit of a question mark. The Steelers were 20th in EPA per rush allowed. Wouldn't shock me if Keanu Benton, the 2nd-round rookie, plays a major role right away. Benton's just far more versatile with larger upside than the vets along the D-line. Benton's flashed in camp at times, and the quote is, some days he looks like the best interior lineman on the roster, which is saying a lot when you play next to Cam Hayward. And then you have a group of veteran replacement level or worse guys in Ogunjobi, Fajoku, Adams, and Loudermilk. Linebacker room has completely flipped, not surprising. Devin Bush and Miles Jack didn't help in the run game, and Pittsburgh got torched by running back passes. They were 30th in running back pass defense efficiency. You bring in Cole Holcomb, Landon Roberts. Cole Holcomb's a tackling machine. You could see Washington's run defense dip when Holcomb wasn't on the field. Last year alone, Holcomb had a tackle on nearly 27% of run snaps. Landon Roberts is a guy that every defensive coach loves. Like, he's a kamikaze type. Was a solid tackler in New England. Brian Flores brought him to Miami, tried to elevate his role below replacement level and a liability in coverage, but did make splash plays as a run defender and blitzer. Quan Alexander was recently signed, replacement level player, but far better in coverage than Roberts. So if Holcomb's your run stopper and your thumper, probably makes more sense to pair Quan with him than another thumper and Roberts. Steelers are listing Keanu Neal as a linebacker. Played strong safety with the Cowboys last season, so I think they're kind of figuring out what he is at this point. Secondary, led by Minkah Fitzpatrick, elite last season, one of the most versatile chess pieces you could have as a defensive coordinator. Can play deep, in the box, in the slot, you name it. Minkah Fitzpatrick finished top 5 against the run and in coverage among qualifying safeties last year. You have KZ, only played the final 9 games last season after returning from injury. Played those 300 snaps to near perfection. He's penciled in next to Minkah in the depth chart. At corner, Levy Wallace, solid veteran and kind of a cornerback 2 type. We'll find out if Pittsburgh has a cornerback 1 on the roster. You referenced Patrick Peterson at the top. To this point in camp, has apparently been outstanding and the best guy in the secondary. Doesn't look his age is the report. And that he's basically consistently shut down Pickens and Johnson. Now, Peterson had a monster season for the Vikings last year. Top 5 among outside corners and adjusted yards allowed per coverage snap, but their scheme was different than the Steelers. More zone than man, but as it stands right now, it looks like Joey Porter might not start day 1, and that could be the perfect bridge, though, right? I mean, at 33 years old, Patrick Peterson, maybe the hope is be the guy for the first 4 to 8 weeks as he wears down with age. That buys time for Joey Porter to get acclimated as a rookie. That could be the nice little exchange there. Chandon Sullivan is having a nice camp and the leader in the clubhouse for the starting nickelback spot. Sounds like a battle between him and Elijah Riley. I mean, I kind of said this at the top. If the interior of the D-line steps up, Pittsburgh finds itself back in the top 10. The schedule of passing offenses the Steelers face dips dramatically from one of the 5 most difficult to below average. Fumble luck is on Pittsburgh's side, but, we've kind of talked a lot of positivity here towards Pittsburgh, but my kind of overview here, Todd, is like the Steelers are a better football team than last year. The talent's better. But yeah, I mean, there's young guys I think that should ascend here and raise the floor and the ceiling. But Pittsburgh won 9 games last season, right? Their Pythag wins were actually lower than their preseason market projection of 7.5 wins, right? 7.5 was the win total. Their Pythag ended up amounting to 7.3. The Steelers won 7 of 9 games post-bye. Those wins came against the Saints, Colts, Falcons, Panthers, Raiders, Browns, and Ravens without Lamar Jackson. You think about each of those teams' quarterback situations. They were all in flux. Now, all of a sudden, the current market has Pittsburgh at 8.8 wins. That's a 1.5 game improvement year over year relative to their Pythag number. So we all understand the Steelers are improved. But who is Pittsburgh definitively better than even in their own division?
I mean, it's a great question and one that's going to bear watching. I mean, you mentioned how well they performed down the stretch, but almost every one of those games, with the exception being the regular season finale against the Cleveland Browns, was decided by 1 score. So it's a play here, it's a play there, and that's what the Pythag numbers indicate, like you alluded to there, that show, hey, look, margin of victory is something that I know a lot of people say, oh, well, the nerds get bogged down with it. It's a win-loss business. Well, you know what? You can only defy that level of variance for so long before it catches up to you, and when it does, it can be a cruel mistress, as sports bettors know, and a lot of franchises know as well. So the Pittsburgh Steelers will be interesting to see if they can find that level of separation. Kenny Pickett can take the next step in his sophomore campaign, or if there's a little bit of a step backwards before this franchise can take a subsequent step forward. You can
just win, baby, is good for fans. It's good for coaches in retaining jobs. It's good for the GM. It's good for owners. It's not good for finding market inefficiencies and locating an edge, right?
No, it is definitely not something along those lines. As we joke all the time, the best thing that you can find in a lot of these sports is teams that don't win games. They stay under the radar, but yet still find a way to exceed odds makers' expectations. Happens a lot more frequently in college football and college basketball than the NFL, where it feels like almost every team finishes around 500 if odds makers are doing their jobs. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Before we get to the best bet portion of the program, though, Payne talked about the good doc at the top. You, of course, can follow Deepak Shona at SportMD Analysis, and he shares his perspective on a lot of the injuries that teams will be staring down in camp as far as the AFC North landscape is concerned.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
Thanks for that intro, guys. There are a number of big injuries in the AFC North, mostly from just 2 teams, but none is obviously bigger than the Bengals' Joe Burrow. Now, we've seen him walking around at practice, not wearing a boot and not really having much of a limp. And this is about 2 weeks post-injury now, but reportedly he was out of the boot and not having a limp at about 1 week post-injury. That timeline implies a grade 1 strain. So in the off-season or preseason, a grade 1 strain is managed the way a grade 2 strain is in the regular season. And therefore, we'd expect about 3 to 4 weeks. You have plenty of time to let Joe Burrow really heal. The faster they rush him back, the more likelihood there is of a recurrence with these. So it's very unsurprising to see them take it slow, to hear Zach Taylor say several weeks. It's all in line with a return in about 4 weeks from the injury date, and overall recurrence rate is relatively low. Now, we do understand the concern for fans and fantasy managers saying that Joe Burrow, for Jamar Chase saying that I don't want to see Joe Burrow until week 5, and I 100% meant that statement. And while we do appreciate Chase's concerns for Burrow, we really doubt that such an absence is ready, definitely leaning towards his return for week 1. And then also on the Bengals, we have Chidobe Awuzie. Now, he tore his ACL late October, had surgery early November. That puts him at about an 11-month time point, and the average on these is a 10.5-month return for a defensive back. The position demands a lot of reaction and agility, so that is a harder position to return to. Awuzie is a high level, although I wouldn't put him in the most elite of elite athlete category for his position, but he is a high level player there. And for that reason, he has a very good chance of being ready for week 1. There usually is a performance dip, unfortunately, anticipating about 85% explosiveness efficiency for week 1, and then ramping up to the mid-90s by about week 8. And then we go to the Ravens, and they've really been the subject of a lot of injury questions this offseason, starting with J.K. Dobbins. Now, on Dobbins, you have to look at his prior injury history, and specifically that multi-ligament knee injury history for the previous year. He last year's production dip was very much expected, as were the durability issues in year 1 off of this huge surgery. The injury impact projects to last 19 to 22 months in most of our data, and he's now past that time point. And we did see him at the end of the season put up 100 yards per game, 6.5 yards per carry in his last 5 games. And we're very much expecting that sort of production from Dobbins going forward. Again, he was a truly elite athlete, potentially one of the Saquon Barkley, Adrian Peterson type of mold based on his athletic metrics. So you really would expect a strong recovery from J.K. Dobbins here. And then we look at Gus Edwards in the backfield, also a little unclear why exactly he's been out recently. He had an ACL. He's not, by his athletic metrics, as high rated of an athlete as the Dobbins or the Barkleys. He's more middle of the pack for a running back. But you would expect, therefore, his ACL from the previous year to affect his performance in last year's production. And then regarding last year, he came back, he had a hamstring strain. That's also not an uncommon story when someone comes back fast from an ACL. This year, we don't really have any indication that he has a new injury per Harbaugh. They're just taking it slow with him. Although, truthfully, it's a little bit of an odd story as to why that is occurring. Nonetheless, based on the information we have, we don't expect any limitations for Gus Edwards at the moment. And then next up, we have Rashad Bateman, who was actually just yesterday activated off the PUP list. Great news for Bateman and for the Ravens. Now, with Rashad Bateman, we do expect him to be available week 1, but the Lisfranc data does show performance dips, and that's likely because it's in an area of the foot that is important for pushing off, and therefore likely impacts his agility, his quickness in and out of cuts. And so we do, in our data, see about a 15% dip in his efficiency and explosiveness for the first half of this season, and then ramping up to close to 100%. This tends to recover a little faster than an ACL production dip, so about 100% is expected around week 8 in our data. And then also on the Ravens, but on the other side of the ball, you may remember David Ojabo. He had his Achilles tear, unfortunately, during his pro day, and now we look at his timeline. Ojabo is really an elite athlete, and we saw Cam Akers with similar or even a little bit lower athletic metrics pre-injury now look like he's recovering from that Achilles tear, and Ojabo looks like he could do the same. I fully expect him to be ready to go week 1. The key with him is going to be explosiveness off of that torn or repaired Achilles, and at this point, we do anticipate him not being 100%, but early season around week 4 to 6 is when he projects to get there. So we have optimism because youth and pre-injury athleticism, as well as draft capital, all work in Ojabo's favor in the algorithms. So we haven't seen a lot of defensive ends come off of Achilles tears to be strong performers, but we certainly do think Ajabo can do it. And that's all we got for today, so I'll kick it back over to y'all.
I don't know, Payne, after listening to Deepak, if Bengals fans should be optimistic about Joe Burrow, but the bottom line is this. With a franchise quarterback, handle him with kid gloves. You can't win the season in weeks 1 or 2, but you can definitely lose it if that calf injury got progressively worse.
I don't divulge everything, and I'll just make this statement. I didn't bet it. My group hasn't bet it. But within the last 72 hours, there are some well-respected groups that have come in and bet the Bengals under 11.5 wins. You kind of mentioned the 10.5 number. That's at a spot or two. I think the consensus at this point is 11.5 minus 50, minus 55, somewhere in that range. I haven't bet it, but if you're someone that needs to degen out and bet all 32 teams win totals, or you're in a pool, right? That's certainly the way that some of the sharper groups have bet this in the last 72
Somewhere
hours.
out there, Brad Powers is taking offense to that comment. Having 32 win totals in the NFL is his portfolio for college football.
He's not hit.
I know, but his college football portfolio
100%.
gets up there. He's probably got 250 bets right now before the season starts.
Yeah, you got to put this on a percentage basis. I don't think he's got 133 college football win totals.
It's a very good point. He may have 122, but he may omit 10 to 12 teams when he's going back and taking some of the middles that present themselves when you move as early as Brad does with those win totals hitting the board. Kind of tease the best bet before we talk to Deepak, and I know we've told our loyal listeners that we normally want to make sure that we give you an actionable element that you can take with you to the window and be invested with us from weeks 1 through week 18. Every podcast may not carry that. Do we break the streak here with the AFC North, or are you sending us running to the window with our third divisional preview?
So nothing in the AFC North, and it's not a win total, and maybe we'll discuss this at a later point because we want to give out things that are widely available, and alt win totals are certainly becoming a little bit more prevalent in this market. We kind of referenced the Browns one that's probably worth a few shekels. But I kind of want to piggyback off the NFC East show. And since that time, more turmoil in Washington. Ron Rivera threw his hand-picked OC Eric Bieniemy under the bus by publicly saying players have complained about Bieniemy's coaching
Absolutely
style.
Incredible to say that this early in camp.
And by doing that, Rivera simultaneously, neglects the trust of his players that came to him behind closed doors and his confidence, right? So... part of our breakdown on the Commanders, I believe it was Monday, was we talked about the O-line, 24th in adjusted line yards created, 26th in yards created before first contact last season. I don't see an upgrade in talent. My thoughts on Wiley are well documented in the camp reports. Have not been good about the Commanders' O-line. Washington last season was 27th in pass rate over expectation, very run-heavy. Eric Bieniemy is going to want to throw more. And when you're only favored in one game by more than 2 points, Washington will likely have to throw more. The schedule of run defense Washington faces goes from the very easiest in the league to average. Chris Rodriguez has been added to the running back room in Washington. Ron Rivera spoke very highly of him. Antonio Gibson's still around. Brian Robinson, to me, is a two-down back. Doesn't have a ton of burst. 4.6 40 guy. Was 32nd in yards per carry after first contact. Let's go under 800.5 rushing yards on Brian Robinson Jr. Lay the $1.45. Our number on this, our projected number was 703. So still a lot of value there. The prevalent number is under 800.5, lay $1.45. There is one spot that finally we had to beat up a little bit. That's lower, but that is the widely available.
The boys couldn't help themselves. If you're going to dangle some of that low hanging fruit out there, you guys are going to gobble it up eventually. We know how this routine works.
Yeah, had to get a little taste before giving it out to 100,000.
All right, we have done plenty of damage on this fine show. We will, of course, be back. I don't even know what the hell day it is. You don't either. Early next week.
Today's Thursday. We're back on Monday. Whenever Monday is. What's the date
NFC
on that?
North, I don't know. 72, 90,
it's the 14th.
96 hours from now.
14th.
Don't ask me questions that I don't have answers to.
It's very easy. We're doing all of these NFL division previews on the same day.
Mondays and Thursdays.
NFL previews every single year for the last, almost decade now. Monday and Thursday.
I get it, but I just don't know what the actual date was. So I had to remind myself that today was Thursday. Therefore, there's another preview coming on Monday. We have a full slate of NFL preseason stuff that's out there. So I want to remind all of our loyal listeners, it is a marathon, not a sprint. We know you like to put your money into play earlier and often, but just tread lightly with the preseason. It's an information-based game. These numbers are even more volatile now than what they've been in the past. So if you choose to invest in any of the exhibition football that's out there, do your homework. Make sure you get your money in, get the best of the number, and give yourself the best opportunity. Any other words of wisdom, parting shots, things that you'd like to get off your chest before you get a 4-day break?
Nope. Back Monday the 14th, Pete Rose Day.
Monday the 14th it is. Talking all things NFC North. I know Bears fans will be extremely excited about all the positive praise that we're going to heap on the shoulders of Justin Fields going forward. Most importantly, the one lasting takeaway, with a Brian Robinson rushing total, ticket in hand in the player prop market. Let's hope early January, if not earlier than that. We'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.